turn things over to Ezra. So, Ezra, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dick. I appreciate the introduction. And welcome everybody to the What's New in ITIL 4 presentation. My name is Ezra Wise, as Dick mentioned. I am a solutions architect and senior consultant with RightStar. I've been delivering service management solutions and helping customers realize value from those solutions for over 20 years. In fact, yeah, it's been over 21 years at this point. Um, so first question on everybody's mind is why ITIL 4? Why did they even come out with an ITIL 4? And I think Dick did a great job of mentioning some of the circumstances that uh, really required ITIL to kind of relook at itself and the IT infrastructure library for what it was in version 3. And when you look at that, ITIL 3 was introduced in about 2007. And that was well before things like cloud computing had taken off to the extent that it has. It was before artificial intelligence and machine learning. It was before, viable platforms as a service and information as a service. We've got really a um, revamping of ITIL to account for the modern digital world. Things have changed quite a bit in the last dozen years plus since ITIL 3 was originally introduced. And it frankly, as Dick had mentioned, it did start to get a little stale. This may have worked a dozen years ago, but the dynamic world of information technology and of business in general it's changed a lot. So we found that a lot of the principles in ITIL 3, while they are still sound in and of themselves, there were a lot of gaps, a lot of things that weren't being accounted for and weren't being addressed as a result. So now we're trying to provide this really holistic picture of service delivery. It's really an end-to-end picture of the delivery of services that includes things like the cloud services that service delivery is relying on, platforms as a service, software as a service, the various partners and suppliers, and really end-to-end modeling of the entire service delivery chain. Another thing ITIL 4 is looking to do is integrate with other established ways of working. So there's been a lot of other methods and mechanisms that have come out since ITIL 3 was introduced. And this actually incorporates those other ways of working, such as governance frameworks like COBIT or PMBOK. It integrates with DevOps models like Agile and Lean, and other methods that have been shown to be effective like Scrum and Kanban. Now, it still includes the best of ITIL 3, so they didn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There still are sound principles in the management, delivery, and maintainability and continual improvement of services that have been carried forward, just improved upon. And really, the big difference in ITIL 4 is focus to create value. So it used to be all about the service, delivery of service, development, operation of services, improvement of services. Now it's really looking at those services and the value that they create more from a either organizational perspective or more importantly from the customer's perspective, the customers of those service providers, and making sure that they're in line with those expectations. So some of the ways ITIL 4 has actually changed, they've introduced a few new concepts. There's a lot of new stuff, but we're going to look at some high-level items like the guiding principles, which is a basically 7 set of good principles and of service management in general, and we'll dig into those in a second. Another new thing are the 4 dimensions of service management to make sure that, again, we're providing that holistic approach and we're not favoring one dimension over another to make sure we've got essentially a balanced scorecard in the development and delivery of services. A new model that they've come up with is the service value system, which is an operating framework that explains the components and activities of the organization and how the ecosystem essentially works to create value for customers. At the core of the service value system is what's called the service value chain. And that's when you dig a little deeper, we see the operating model that defines those key activities and leverages the organizational resources in the delivery of that value to its customers. There's been a nomenclature change by and large from the notion of process areas. You might think of processes like incident management, change management, release management, et cetera. Those have really been elevated from processes with defined inputs and outputs to more of practices and general organizational practices around those specific areas. We'll look at that. And lastly, there's been some certification changes. So with ITIL 4, of course, there's new stuff, more stuff, and we'll briefly look at what that might look like, especially if you're already ITIL 3 Foundation certified or expert certified, then what some of the implications are for that. But first up are the guiding principles, and this is a key concept of ITIL 4. This is really centralized messaging, not only for ITIL 4. You'll find these principles pretty common throughout business in general, but they really are at the heart of effective service delivery and service management. And the first is focusing on value, really understanding our customers, understanding what's important to them. It's one thing to deliver a service and feel like you're doing a good job, but if at the end of the day, the customers aren't receiving that and perceiving the value that they're receiving from that, then it might need to be reevaluated so that we can put themselves in their shoes and pretty periodically go through and be prepared to change our definition of value based on changes in the marketplace, changes to customers' expectations. We need to be prepared to redefine value iteratively and go back to see how we can continue to provide value. Another principle is just starting where you are. It's basically saying, you know what, where are we at today? What do we already have? Let's not just start from scratch, but let's look at things that we can reuse, things that we've already developed, maybe some of those lessons learned, experiences from other teams. Let's make sure that we understand all of these things when we might be defining value and when we go to deliver value. So, take a frank look at where your baseline is, where you are today, and figure out a good starting point that's going to be able to move you forward. Regarding moving forward, this is probably a big departure from, I think, the more traditional waterfall model, and that's really the adoption of the iterative progress and making sure that we're getting continuous feedback from our stakeholders, from our customers as part of that loop. But having done this for over 20 years, I can remember. So where all of our projects were waterfall. We got a massive requirements. We would sit and focus on, okay, how do we deliver those requirements? And at the end of the day, we would deliver a system that met all of those requirements. Now, at the end of the day, the customer may have looked at that and said, well, what is this? What are we looking at here? You may have met all of the requirements, but you didn't meet the spirit of those requirements, which for technical people is kind of hard to deal with, right? We're like, well, the requirement is the requirement. But really, this is more of an agile type of approach where I think ITIL has actually done well to adopt this philosophy that you don't want to have that waterfall method. Instead, we want to make small gains, have sprints, go through and divide this into smaller incremental chunks that we can work on, demonstrate, and then solicit feedback to see how it can be improved upon and set expectations along the way. So when we do get to the final product, the end point, there are no surprises. The stakeholders have been involved every step of the way. Customers have been involved every step of the way. They know exactly what they're going to get. And then there's a valuable product at the end of the day that they're receiving as a result. One of the key areas from my perspective as a guiding principle, and something that I'm a little surprised I still don't see enough of in organizations that I consult with, are collaboration and visibility amongst teams. I think this is one of the biggest challenges still facing businesses today, is this tendency to work in silos. And when I was looking through this again, and I was rereading an actual book that I've read several years ago, but it's Franklin Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and he actually has this section where he's talking about maturity, and it's intellectual, emotional, physical maturity, and how we start as dependent and then we become independent. But then really that next level of maturity where we should strive is interdependence. And I see this in very much that same vein. And even though it's 30 years later, I still see it as as true as it was then, and as needful now as it ever has been in the past. And I look at this notion of interdependence, and I think of an example I heard way back in grade school, which is, a horse can pull a lot of weight. It can pull, a carriage worth of weight. Two horses, you would think, can pull two carriages worth of weight, and that's not true. Two horses can carry three carriages worth of weight. So by their interdependence, now again, they're strong, they're physically independent, but through their interdependence and working together collaboratively, they can accomplish so much more. And the same is true in the workplace. So as we are in our silos and we are independent and able to produce great things by ourselves, really reaching across those business units, those business teams, and really being able to associate with them and draw from their ideas and their talent pool and their resources, we can achieve outcomes that are so much more than we would ever be able to achieve independently by ourselves, by a single team or a single business unit. So there really are higher gains to be made through collaboration and visibility. It's just good sense, right? I think there's still a notion from a lot of organizations that if they don't promote visibility, they get to kind of tell people whatever they want to, set those perceptions of them, where that's not true. And all it does is, you close down visibility, you sort of build up the sense of that visibility. Think and work holistically. What does that mean, right? So we really want to work together in an integrated way. And it's just whenever we do anything, we should think about, okay, how is this impacting the greater goals? Do we have a clearly stated direction? Am I working in that direction with everybody else at the same time and providing those successful outcomes? Keep it simple and practical. That's, I think of the old, the KISS anagram. Keep it simple, stupid, right? But this is really outcome-based thinking. We really want to keep things as lean as possible. And if we are looking at processes, services, actions, metrics, anything that's not directly adding value to the outcome, then we don't need it. It's not necessary. Let's look for those opportunities to improve it. Keep it simple. Simpler is generally better. And lastly, it's to optimize and automate. ITIL does provide some very specific guidance around optimization, and I won't get into it here just for time purposes, but it really is going through a collaborative effort to make sure we agree on what optimization should be done, that we've prioritized our optimizations accordingly. And then when it gets to automation, I don't think anyone on this call or any other would have too much trouble understanding the value of automation. I don't think I've come across an organization in the last decade that wasn't looking to automate some of their processes, some of their um, methods, because of the improved availability, productivity, reduced cost, better performance and reliability, you name it, right? And the list is endless, goes on and on. Everyone wants to automate whatever they can. So those are the guiding principles. And again, they're kind of critical to any decision that we make. Whenever we go to perform some unit of work, we're developing a new service, we're supporting a service, we should always have some level of this in our mindset. The next key concept is really with the 4 dimensions. Now, I look at this as if you're familiar with ITIL 3, they had the 4 Ps. It was people, process, products, and partners, if that rings a bell to anybody. Um, and these are similar, right? So at the top left, we have number 1, which is the organizations and people, and really taking into account what is the organization prepared to handle? What's the organizational structure? What are our roles and responsibilities and systems of authority and things like the organizational culture? Do we have shared beliefs and values and attitudes? Um, what are some of the organizational objectives? Is it clearly stated? Do we have a firm mission statement so that everybody knows at the end of the day they can kind of come back to this guiding principle that they know is going to ultimately allow them to collaborate with other teams and arrive at a mutual objective, a mutual goal? And lastly, it's the skills and competencies of the organizations and the people within them. What do we have? Are we trying to do things that we simply aren't prepared to support, as an example? Number 2 is information and technology. When we talk about information, it's, what services are we going to manage? What information will those services manage? What supporting information is necessary? What knowledge is necessary to deliver and manage those services? How do we protect archive, dispose of that information, and the knowledge assets that we get from those services. Those are some of the considerations. When it comes to technology, is it compatible with the existing architecture? Um, will the technology products be used by the stakeholders, and will they be able to work together? Do we have those collaboration tools in place today? How do the emerging technologies influence the service? Are we about to put a lot of time and effort into something that's about to get usurped here in the next year because there's a much better delivery method coming down the pipe? Which also is this viable in the foreseeable future? One thing I remember when cloud computing came out, and this was one of the dimensions, one of the biggest hurdles for cloud computing was around data sensitivity. And organizations that I spoke with early on were very hesitant to adopt cloud computing because of the notion that their data was just flying around the internet somewhere. So at first there was a lot of distaste and hesitancy to actually go and adopt those cloud technologies. And it was up to the cloud providers to over time show them that no, their data was protected, everything was just as secure as if it were on premise, and here's how. And over time you see that the organization was more willing to accept that risk, and that, and oftentimes the risk never actually even proved out. So it's one of those things that organizationally they look at to see, is this something we're ready for or not? The partners and suppliers are involved in almost every phase of service delivery, and are impacted by the services that we develop. And then lastly, the value streams and processes. You'll notice the value streams actually been borrowed from the Lean Agile framework, which is a series of steps that an organization uses to create and deliver products and services. And the process is the activities with we transform inputs into defined outputs. The last factor, based on the PESTLE method, you see the political factors, economic factors, social factors, technological factors, legal, environmental, and other that come into play. And not unlike this latest COVID-19 pandemic, where you see organizations changing the way that they deliver their goods and services. You see, grocery stores actually limiting customers into the store, and enforcing social distancing and things like that. These other things have an impact on the products and services that are delivered as well. They can't be discounted. They have to be considered. So the idea is here, again, it's a balanced scorecard. When we develop these services, we can't forget about everything else. We can't come out with the perfect technology solution in lieu of understanding how the organization is going to be able to use it. So we have a perfect technology solution that no one uses, then we haven't provided any value at all. If we have a technology solution that, for example, our partners and suppliers can't supply, they can't give us the goods we need to actually deliver it, then what's the point, right? So all of these things need to kind of feed into each other when we're developing these products and services and thinking about how we're going to support and deliver them. I'm going to speed up the pace a little bit. I know we've got 5 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So a couple of different models that have been introduced is the service value system. And I won't spend too much time on this, but it really is those guiding principles we talked about are factored into the overall thinking around the delivery of value. We're accepting opportunities and demands as an input. We're running it through our service value chain. That's um, surrounded by the guiding principles, making sure we're thinking the right way. It's got our governance frameworks in place. We have our practices such as our service desks or our change advisory boards, et cetera, in place. And then we're always wanting to improve. Continual improvement's been a theme of ITIL since its inception. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's especially a focus now. But part of that continual improvement is on improving the value that customers are receiving this. So at the end of the day, we're trying to produce value with this service value system. Digging into the service value system itself is the service value chain. So you see I have the inset there, and at the core of that, now we're starting to talk through more specifics, a little bit more tactical. There's 6 key value activities, from the planning and then improving on the services we deliver. When demand is noticed, we engage with stakeholders, we engage with customers, we engage with the teams required to actually build and or deliver these services. We have a design and transition activity where we're going to make sure that the products and services are continually meeting stakeholder expectations for things like quality or costs, time to market. We obtain and build to make sure the components are needed by a product or service are available. Again, going back to our supplier and partners, making sure we've got what we need in order to ultimately deliver and support those products and services that meet those stakeholder present expectations rather. And at the end of the day, when those products and services are delivered, we want to make sure that they have the value that we're promoting. And it's not just good enough to provide that value. We always have to be looking for ways to improve upon that value. Any of us know that, you start to take things for granted after a while, and you expect a service to be there, you expect it to provide something. While at first that may have been extremely valuable to you, over time it just kind of loses its luster, and you start to, again, just take it for granted. But if you can improve on that value, then you're continually letting your customers know that, look, this is still relevant, we're providing additional value, makes them take notice and realize the value that they're getting from that service. So really the summary here is that, these are the activities required to develop, deliver, and support the services in an organization. And this is where we actually utilize those resource capabilities and the practices that we've developed previously. I've got a couple more slides, but I know we've only got about 3 minutes, so let me jump through to the next one. Some of the changes in ITIL 4 were, again, from this notion of processes to practices. They've originally there was an effort to consolidate and reduce the number of processes that were in ITIL 3 because a lot of people felt like there were more. So they went through an effort where they consolidated and reduced the number of processes, whereas there had been 26 after they've consolidated and reduced. It now has 34. So and for good reasons, I guess you could say, right? So there are brand new practice areas, things that didn't exist, 12 years ago when ITIL 3 or 13 years ago when ITIL 3 was released. So new practices like organizational change management. ITIL always did really good about saying, here's what you should have in place, but not really so good about how you should get there. How do you get an organization to adopt that model and want to change and create positions for like release coordinators and things like that. So the organizational change management piece was always missing, and that's more of a general management practice. Workforce and talent management. Another new practice area is around business analysis, and yet another is for infrastructure and platform management specifically. Several of the practices actually changed. So measurement and reporting has actually been elevated to a practice, whereas before it was just a function. And now we've got change management. It's been rebranded as change control. Release and deployment management have been split into their own respective practices. So there's a release management and a deployment management practice area. SACM, service asset and configuration management, have been split into IT asset management and service configuration management. The service desk, which used to be an organizational function, is now a full-fledged practice. And application development has been renamed to software development and management. So the items that are blue are new. Anything that's changed is that kind of, I guess, deep red or brown. And anything bolded and underlined are discussed in depth in the ITIL 4 foundation training. And then really quickly on certification updates, they do have this new designation of ITIL strategist. It's the dark blue one in the middle. They actually have these two practitioners, which is the managing professional and the strategic leader. Each one of the specialists items are working towards either that ITIL managing professional or ITIL strategic leader. ITIL Foundation covers all of it to some extent. And then in order to become eligible for the ITIL master, you have to have both the managing professional and strategic leader certifications to pursue. There is a bridge course, both for the ITIL Foundation as well for the ITIL experts to get into the managing professional designation. The ITIL Foundation training is generally, and I've seen it plus or minus, but about 2.5 days with the exam at the end of that second day of training. And that's, I think I'm 45 seconds long, so I apologize. And for that, I'll turn it back over either to Alan or to Dick. See if
All
there's any.
right. Great job, Ezra. Now would be a good time to ask any questions. We understand we had set this up for 30 minutes, so if some of you want to hang around, we can answer some of your questions. So you can either use the chat box or the Q&A box. And I have the first question here. And Ezra, the first one here is, we have limited time and budget. You say that we should start where we are, but what give me some ideas. Where should we focus on first? It's kind of a general question, but
Yeah.
are there any
Well,
things that maybe you can get the most value from that you've seen?
and I guess it depends on what challenge you're trying to solve, right? So the start where you are is in the context of, we want to do something new. And I'll use an example. I'm working with a large school district in their public school system. So they're responsible for K through 12 education, and it's a very large school district. Well, this most recent outbreak of COVID-19 put all the students under stay-at-home orders. They weren't able to deliver their education anymore. So they had a big challenge on their hands of how do they continue to deliver education services without teachers in the schoolrooms, without students in the schoolrooms, and they weren't set up for virtual learning. So there was a huge initiative to say, okay, how can we uh, implement a distance learning program in a relatively short time frame, uh, and make it effective. So that's a good example of, okay, well, where are we today? What do we have today at our disposal? And the reality is they have things like VPN, so all of their staff can work remotely from home if they needed to. Even though they didn't, they were all employee, office-based employees, but they had the capacity, so they needed to ramp up that capacity, but they had it there. The other thing is they've got laptops. They have tens of thousands, actually over 100,000 laptops that they used within the schools for learning programs. But they weren't set up for things like distance learning. They weren't set up for things like, logging into some sort of student information system or student portal where education was actually being provided. So they had the laptops, but what are you going to do with those laptops? You have to get them distributed. You have to know where they're going. Yeah, there's got to be some sense of accountability. You have to have them imaged so that they can run the software securely, safely. There's all kinds of compliances, as you might know, with students and being able to run software. So the security measures, a lot of stuff that goes to it. But they had them. They had systems to be able to track them. They had the laptops. They have the imaging software in place. So it's really, where are we today? What do we have at our disposal in order to start with that? And I'm happy to say that in very short order, within a matter of weeks, they were able to get laptops through their imaging stations. They were able to distribute it to the majority of students in the district, and they had internal education services where they were able to train the teachers who otherwise didn't know how to conduct online training or education through the virtual software, the education software. They were able to ramp those teachers up in short order and be able to resume, some sense of normalcy with respect to classes. Now, it's not perfect. I think we all agree it's probably not ideal, but it's something. And they didn't have to just start from scratch. They collectively looked at all the resources that they had, knew what they had to start with, and then started from there.
Wow, Ezra, what a success story. I just out of curiosity, what did they use for distance learning software? Was this like using just Zoom or something like that, which everybody else is using?
No,
Yeah.
they had I think it's called Focus, and they have different modules within Focus. So it was some capability within that solution that was able to be used for um, certain courseware, I believe.
Wow. Okay, that's exciting. All right. Well, there's one final question, then we can wrap up, and that is, and you kind of covered this a little bit, but do you have any recommendations for tackling this process redesign from a remote perspective? Just collaborate using the remote tools that these organizations have in place, and just try to set up meetings and do it that way. Is that kind of what you would recommend?
Well, yeah, you gotta keep things moving forward. I think it's an interesting time because I see, and Dick, you know this, there's a lot of employees that within RightStar that have been working remotely and from home for years. So a lot of us, this is just another day. Whereas I look at my wife and her organization where they're 100% on site all the time. And I think the adjustment period has been much more difficult. But I've also seen where in a couple of weeks time, people have gotten into a bit of a groove. And even my wife, who, didn't know how to, uh, start Zoom and was, I'm sure, had the camera looking up her nose and the whole nine. Now she's there with the fun virtual backdrops and and they're all getting together. So if you're used to that true collaboration, if you're used to seeing people, I think technologies like Zoom are a great thing because it does keep people so interconnected. And I feel like the more that they're doing those, the more they feel like they're still part of that team. And even though it's not 100% the same, they're in lockstep with the rest of the team. They're all on board. They're all in constant communication. But it comes back to that collaboration and communication comment I made earlier. You just really need to be, hyper communicative, especially in this type of situation where you're always making sure that you're replying all and everybody's in on the conversation. And there's a number of tools out there. I know Atlassian and Jira's, they've got a lot of those collaboration technologies that, Microsoft Teams is another one. So a lot of those tools have really been propelled to the forefront now more than ever. And I think we're seeing the value of those. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere as a result.
Well, and the other thing you can do is you can keep the camera on at all times because you can't hide. Right. If you got the camera on, you got to pay attention. So anyway, all right. Well, that's pretty much a wrap. So I wanted to thank you, Ezra. Great job, and thank you everybody that's still out there for attending. And we really appreciate your time and, of course, again, your attendance today. If you want to, I think, go back one slide, Ezra, I think you can see. You want to contact RightStar, there's a couple of ways to do that, either through our website, you can call us up, send us an email, and we can get you started. I mean, you may want to start small with, figure out what really makes the most sense for you. What should you focus on first? How do we do this in a remote perspective? And we can offer a very quick and very low cost way for you to get started, and then teach you essentially how to fish then if you want to finish this on your own. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd love to talk to you more about this. And again, thanks everybody for your time and attendance, and stay safe and healthy. And that'll do it. Signing off from RightStar. Hope to see you all at the next one. So long now.